The kid behind the counter turned the old motorcycle helmet over in his hands, looked at the faded pinstripes on the shell, and set it back on the glass upside down. "Yeah, old helmet. We don't really take helmets. I can do $15. Roy Culpepper stood on the other side of the counter, 81 years old, the faded black Harley-Davidson t-shirt he'd been wearing under his flannel since 1979, just visible at the collar, the old white open-face motorcycle helmet sitting upside down on the glass between them, and watched a 22-year-old in a highway pawn polo look at the helmet his father had ridden in for 10 years and see $15 worth of old fiberglass. "That was my daddy's," Roy said, quiet. The kid, Garrett by the crooked name tag, shrugged and tapped the shell of the helmet with his knuckles twice, testing it like a melon. "Sure, 15. Final." Here's what that kid in the pawn shop didn't know. Here's what nobody in that shop knew. The old white open-face helmet Roy Culpepper had just set down on that counter was worth $73,000. It was a 1960 Bell 500 TX, the standard open-face helmet of the American motorcycle world in the late 1950s and early 1960s. The helmet itself, a white fiberglass shell with a snap-on visor now cracked, was worth maybe $20 to a collector who liked mid-century bike gear. But the paint on the helmet was not factory paint. The pinstripes, thin, flowing asymmetrical lines in metallic gold and candy apple red that swept from the brow around both sides and converged at the crown in a pattern that looked like something between a flame and a wave, had been applied by hand, by brush, by one man. And on the back of the helmet, at the base of the skull line, was a small image, maybe 2 inches across, of a winged eyeball. Not printed, not a decal. Hand-painted in 4 colors, with brush strokes so fine they looked like pen lines unless you held a magnifier to them. The winged eyeball, the flying eye, the single most recognizable image in the history of American custom culture. The man who had painted it was Kenny Howard, known to the world as Von Dutch. Von Dutch was born in 1929 in Los Angeles and died in 1992 in a horse trailer in Sequoia, California, where he had been living alone. In between, he became the most influential custom painter and pinstriper in the history of the American automobile and motorcycle world. He invented the flying eyeball logo. He painted helmets, gas tanks, dashboards, gun stocks, mailboxes, and anything else people brought him freehand with a Mac No. 10 sword striper brush and a steady hand that other painters compared to a surgeon's. He worked out of garages and sheds in the backs of cars. He charged almost nothing. He was erratic, brilliant, alcoholic, and allergic to fame. He turned down commissions from millionaires and painted a stranger's toolbox for a 6-pack of beer. He is considered, by unanimous consensus among collectors, historians, and the Patterson Automotive Museum in Los Angeles, the founding artist of American custom culture. Authenticated Von Dutch hand-painted objects were among the most valuable pieces of American folk art in the current market. Fewer than 30 Von Dutch helmets were documented in private and institutional collections. The last comparable example, a hand-painted Bell 500 TX with a verified flying eyeball, had sold at Bonham's in Los Angeles in 2020 for $68,000. Roy's father, Dale Culpepper, had ridden his 1959 Harley-Davidson Panhead from Bakersfield to a car show in Maywood, California, in the spring of 1961. Von Dutch had been at the show, not as an exhibitor, but as a wanderer who turned up at car shows and offered to pinstripe people's cars and bikes and helmets for whatever they wanted to pay. Dale had watched Von Dutch paint a gas tank for 20 minutes, mesmerized by the brush and the hand and the lines. He had taken off his helmet and asked Von Dutch to paint it. Von Dutch had set the helmet on the trunk of a car, dipped his brush, and painted it in about 8 minutes. Dale had paid him $15, which was more than Von Dutch usually asked, but Dale had thought the work was worth it. Dale had ridden the helmet for 10 more years until he stopped riding in 1971 after a close call with a gravel truck on Highway 99. He had put the helmet in a box in the garage. The helmet had been in the garage for 58 years. This is the story of how Roy Culpepper walked into Highway Pawn on a Wednesday morning in October with $430 of trouble in his head and walked out with the discovery that the paint job on his father's old motorcycle helmet, the $15 pinstripe job a stranger had done at a car show in 1961, was the hand of the most important custom painter in American history. Before I tell you what happened when the expert walked through that door, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let me tell you about Roy. Roy Dale Culpepper was born in 1943 in Bakersfield, California. His father, Dale Culpepper, worked the oil fields out of Oildale for 29 years as a roughneck and a derrick hand for Occidental Petroleum. His mother, Jolene, waitressed at the Wool Growers restaurant on 19th Street for 22 years. Roy went to East Bakersfield High, graduated in 1961, did 4 years in the Marines, Camp Pendleton, then Vietnam 65 to 66, came home and spent 34 years at the Kern County Roads Department driving a grader, retired in 2003, married Bonnie Kirkland in 1968, one son, Dale, named for Roy's father, now 54 and living in Fresno, driving long haul for a produce company. Bonnie had died in 2022 of lung cancer. 6 months from diagnosis, never smoked a day in her life, the doctor had called it one of those things. The AC compressor was the problem. The central air unit on the small stucco house on Niles Street had failed in September. Compressor burned out, which in Bakersfield was not a nuisance, but a health risk, because September in Bakersfield was 105 degrees, and Roy was 81 with a heart condition. The HVAC contractor had quoted $430 for a replacement compressor installed. Roy had spent September sleeping on a cot on the back patio with a box fan pointed at his face. His county pension was $1,260 a month. Social Security added $2,120. After property taxes, insurance, electric, the electric was brutal. Bakersfield Electric was always brutal. His heart medications and the blood pressure medications and groceries. He had about $75 of slack in a good month. He did not have $430. He could have called Dale in Fresno. Dale was a long-haul driver whose wife had been laid off from a food processing plant in June. Roy had not asked his son for $1 in 17 years. He was not going to start over an AC compressor. For 12 days, he slept on the patio. On the 13th morning, Wednesday, he went to the garage. The helmet was in a cardboard box on a plywood shelf Dale Sr. had built between the rafters in 1971. The box also contained Dale Sr.'s leather riding gloves, a pair of Buco goggles with cracked lenses, and a Harley-Davidson owner's manual for a 1959 panhead. The helmet was wrapped in a cotton shop rag. Roy unwrapped it. The white Bell 500 TX shell was yellowed with age. The snap-on visor was cracked at the right hinge. The chin strap was stiff, but the pinstripes, the gold and candy apple red lines that swept from the brow around both sides and converged at the crown, were intact. The paint had faded slightly from the white it must have been in 1961, but the lines were clean and unbroken, and the metallic gold still caught the light. And on the back of the helmet, at the base of the skull line, the small flying eyeball, wings spread, pupil staring, looked out from behind 58 years of garage dust with the same defiant energy it had had when the brush had put it there. Dale Sr. had told Roy about the helmet exactly once, in 1974, sitting in lawn chairs in the driveway on Niles Street with bottles of Coors. "I got that helmet painted at a car show in Maywood in '61, Dale had said. "This guy, skinny, beard, weird little hat, he was painting everything people brought him. Cars, bikes, helmets. I watched him do a gas tank, and it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen a man do with a brush. I asked him to do my helmet, and he said, 'Sit down, it'll take 10 minutes. He did it in 8. I gave him $15, and he said that was too much. I said, "The hell it is." Roy had nodded. He had been 31. He had not thought about it again. Dale Culpepper had been the kind of man who rode because riding was what you did if you were young and alive in Bakersfield in the late 1950s. He had not been a club rider. He had not been an outlaw. He had been an oil field roughneck who rode a panhead to work on Monday and rode it to the Kern County Fair on Saturday and rode it to Maywood for a car show on a spring weekend because the weather was good and the road was open and his wife had said, "Go on, Dale, I'll be fine." He had ridden with the helmet from 1961 to 1971. He had stopped riding after the gravel truck. He had put the helmet in the garage and had not mentioned it again because Dale Culpepper did not talk about things he no longer did. Roy sat at the kitchen table that Wednesday morning with the helmet in front of him and the HVAC estimate beside his coffee mug, and he did something he'd sworn he would never do. He put the helmet back in the box and drove to town. The 2002 Chevy Tahoe had 237,000 miles and an exhaust leak that made it sound like a diesel. Roy drove the 3 miles to Highway Pawn on Union Avenue and parked at 9:14 on a hot gray October morning. October in Bakersfield was still 90 degrees. Highway Pawn sat between a tire shop and a check cashing place. The bell jangled as Roy stepped inside. Garrett was behind the counter on his phone and looked up after about 7 seconds. "Help you?" "I've got an old motorcycle helmet. My daddy's got some custom paint on it." "Let's see it." Roy took the helmet out of the box and set it on the glass, crown up. Garrett picked it up, turned it over, looking at the inside padding, not the outside paint, turned it back, looked at the pinstripes, and set it back on the glass upside down. He tapped the shell with his knuckles. "Yeah. Old open face? Bell, I think. We don't really take helmets. Safety regulations, liability, whatever. The paint's kind of cool, but it's not signed or anything. $15. The paint was done by a man at a car show. My daddy said, 'Sure, Pops.'" Garrett set his elbow on the counter beside the upside-down helmet. 15. I'm being nice because of the paint. Take it or leave it." Roy's hands were flat on the counter. His jaw was tight. He thought about the AC compressor. He thought about Bonnie in the hospital bed, the way she'd looked at him in the last week and said, "Roy, I'm sorry about this." He thought about his father on the panhead coming up Niles Street at 6 in the evening with the helmet on and the sun behind him and the sound of the engine rolling down the block ahead of him like a wave. He did not pick up the helmet. He did not say yes. He did not say no. He stood there with both hands flat on the glass and his mouth closed tight, because the only other thing he could do was cry in front of a 22-year-old, and Roy Culpepper had not cried in front of another human being since Bonnie's funeral in 2022. The bell over the door jangled again. A man came in, mid-50s, lean, medium height, with long, silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a low ponytail, a graying soul patch, and deep-set green eyes behind round, tortoise-shell glasses. He wore a worn black leather motorcycle jacket over a white pocket t-shirt, faded black jeans, and scuffed black engineer boots. He carried a battered olive-green Army surplus messenger bag over one shoulder. There was a small enamel pin on his jacket lapel, a flying eyeball, that Roy, if he'd looked closely, would have recognized. He came 2 steps inside, glanced at the counter, and stopped. He looked at the helmet. He did not move for what felt like a long time. His eyes moved from the brow to the crown, following the gold and red pinstripes the way a man reads a sentence he already knows by heart. His eyes moved to the back of the helmet. He saw the flying eyeball. His face changed. Not surprise. Recognition. The deep, almost physical recognition of a man who has spent his entire professional life studying the hand that painted those lines. "Excuse me," he said. His voice was quiet, California quiet, unhurried, the kind of voice that belongs on a back road. "Sir, is that an original paint job on that helmet?" Garrett looked up. "Old guy's selling, $15. The man did not look at Garrett. He looked at Roy. "Sir, my name is Nick Stavros. I am the Senior Curator of Custom Culture at the Peterson Automotive Museum in Los Angeles. I serve on the Authentication Board for Bonham's Custom and Hot Rod Division. I am in Bakersfield today because we are acquiring a pinstriped panel set from a private collection in Oildale. I came into this shop because I always stop in pawn shops in car culture towns. He paused. Would you permit me to examine that helmet? Roy found his voice. You're asking me? It's yours, isn't it? It was my daddy's. Then yes, sir, I'm asking you. And I would ask you, please, to turn that helmet right side up. Setting it upside down puts pressure on the visor hinge and the crown paint. Garrett reached for the helmet, but Nick said, May I? And Roy nodded. Nick Stavros set his messenger bag on the counter and opened it. He drew out a pair of thin white cotton handling gloves, a 10x jeweler's loop, a small LED pen light, a small black light UV flashlight, a soft sable brush, and a leather-bound notebook. He pulled the gloves on finger by finger. He lifted the helmet with both hands, one under the brow, one supporting the back, and set it, crown up, on a soft black felt pad. He dusted the shell gently with the sable brush. He turned the helmet slowly in his hands. He studied the pinstripes, the gold lines, the red lines, the way they flowed from the brow and swept asymmetrically around both sides and converged at the crown in a pattern that was not symmetrical, not geometric, not anything a computer or a stencil could have produced. He studied the brush width. He studied the line weight, the way the lines thickened at certain curves and thinned at others, the way a hand naturally loads and releases paint from a striping brush when the hand belongs to someone who has made the brush an extension of his nervous system. He turned the helmet to the back. He looked at the flying eyeball. He brought the loop to his eye. He studied the eyeball under the penlight. He studied the wing feathers. He studied the pupil. He studied the way the paint sat in the fiberglass, the thickness of the layers, the slight raised ridge at the edge of each line where the brush had lifted. He set the helmet down on the felt pad. He took off his glasses. He closed his eyes. He put his glasses back on. Von Dutch, he said, almost a whisper, then louder, but not by much. This is Von Dutch. He looked at Roy. Mr. Culpepper. Roy Culpepper. Mr. Culpepper. Nick Stavros's voice had changed. It was slower, more careful. The voice of a man who is aware that what he is about to say will change someone's day. Kenny Howard, Von Dutch, was born in 1929 in Los Angeles and died in 1992. He is considered, without exaggeration or debate, the most important custom painter and pinstriper in the history of American culture. He invented the flying eyeball. He invented the aesthetic language of custom cars and motorcycles. Every flame job, every pinstripe, every piece of custom paint on every car and bike in every shop in America descends in some way from Von Dutch's hand. He paused. Von Dutch did not work in a studio. He worked at car shows, in parking lots, in garages, in the backs of friends' shops. He painted whatever people brought him: helmets, gas tanks, dashboards, toolboxes, guitar cases, mailboxes. He used a Mac No. 10 sword striper brush. He charged almost nothing. He turned down work from celebrities and painted a stranger's lunchbox for a beer. He was impossible to find, impossible to schedule, and impossible to predict. The only way to get Von Dutch to paint something for you was to be in the right place at the right time, with the right object and the right attitude. He looked at the helmet. Mr. Culpepper, the pinstripe work on this helmet is Von Dutch's hand. I can identify it the way a handwriting expert identifies a signature. The line weight, the asymmetry, the flow pattern. Von Dutch never used stencils, never used tape, never sketched first. He painted freehand, in one pass, with a loaded brush. The gold metallic is his preferred metal flake mix. The candy apple red is House of Color, his preferred brand. And the flying eyeball on the back is hand-painted in Von Dutch's unmistakable style. The wing feather detail, the pupil shape, the proportion of eye to wing. This is not a copy. This is not an homage. This is the hand. The fluorescent tube over the door flickered. Garrett had not moved. Mr. Culpepper. Authenticated Von Dutch hand-painted objects are among the most valuable pieces of American folk art in the current market. Fewer than 30 Von Dutch helmets are documented in private and institutional collections worldwide. The last comparable Bell 500 TX with a verified Von Dutch flying eyeball sold at Bonham's in Los Angeles in 2020 for $68,000. He held the helmet in the light. The metallic gold caught the fluorescent and threw a warm line across the glass counter. This helmet, with the intact flying eyeball, the original pinstripe work, the Bell 500TX provenance, and the documented 1961 car show origin, at professional appraisal through Bonhams with authentication from the Peterson Automotive Museum, would be valued between $65,000 and $85,000. Conservative estimate, $73,000. Garrett made a sound. His knuckles were no longer tapping anything. I was going to say 20. I meant 20. Roy didn't look at him. He was looking at the helmet on the felt pad and seeing his father. He was seeing Dale Culpepper at a car show in Maywood in 1961, standing behind a skinny guy in a weird hat, watching him paint a gas tank with a brush that moved like a living thing. He was seeing his father take off his helmet and say, "How much to do mine?" And the skinny guy saying, "Sit down. It'll take 10 minutes." And the brush moving across the white shell for 8 minutes, and the flying eyeball appearing on the back, stroke by stroke, as if it had been there all along, and the brush was just uncovering it. $15. 8 minutes. A stranger at a car show. "I said the hell it is," Dale had said about the price, and he had been right. $15 for the hand of Von Dutch was the deal of the century. But Dale hadn't known that. Dale had just known it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen a man do with a brush, and he had wanted it on his helmet, and he had paid what felt right. Some men don't need to know the name to know the work. Nick Stavros handed Roy his card. "Mr. Culpepper, take your time, talk to your son, but please, sir, do not leave this helmet in this shop. And please, do not clean the paint, do not polish it, do not touch the flying eyeball. The surface patina is part of the authentication. 63 years of undisturbed Von Dutch brushwork. Let it be what it is." Roy nodded. He watched Nick wrap the helmet in a soft cotton cloth from his bag and set it gently back in the cardboard box. He closed the flaps. Roy took the box in both hands. He nodded once at Nick Stavros. He walked out past Garrett without a word. In the parking lot, sitting in the Tahoe with the exhaust ticking and the October heat pressing through the windshield, Roy Culpepper held the box on his lap and cried for the first time since Bonnie's funeral. He called Dale that night. Dale drove down from Fresno the next morning. They sat at the kitchen table on Niles Street with the helmet on the felt between them, the gold and red pinstripes catching the kitchen light, the flying eyeball staring up from the back of the shell. Dale Jr., who'd been named for a grandfather he remembered as a quiet man who smelled like pipe tobacco and motor oil, held the helmet in both hands and turned it slowly. "Grandpa never said who painted it?" "He said it was a guy at a car show, skinny, beard, weird hat. He said it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen a man do with a brush." Dale Jr. looked at the flying eyeball for a long time. "It is," he said. They called Nick Stavros at 9. The Peterson Automotive Museum sent a conservator and a Von Dutch authentication specialist to Bakersfield in November. The pinstripe work was photographed under 14 lighting conditions. The brushstroke analysis matched documented Von Dutch technique, line weight, loading pattern, asymmetry signature, metal flake gold mix. The flying eyeball was compared against 11 other authenticated Von Dutch eyeballs in the Peterson's collection. The paint chemistry was tested. House of Color Candy Apple Red, confirmed period correct for 1961. Authentication was unanimous. The Peterson acquired the helmet for permanent display through a 99-year family loan. The museum paid the Culpepper family $69,000. The helmet went on display in the museum's custom culture gallery in December, set on a custom stand at eye level so visitors could see the flying eyeball at the back without touching the paint. The placard read, "Bell 500TX Motorcycle Helmet, 1960, pinstriped and hand-painted by Kenny Howard, Von Dutch, 1929 to 1992, at a car show in Maywood, California, spring 1961. The flying eyeball on the back of the helmet is Von Dutch's signature image, the single most recognizable symbol in American custom culture. Painted in 8 minutes for $15 for oilfield roughneck and Harley rider Dale Culpepper, 1925 to 2003, of Bakersfield, California. Worn by Culpeper from 1961 to 1971. On loan from the family of Roy D. Culpeper, Bakersfield, California. Dale Jr. drove his father to Los Angeles for the dedication. Roy wore his cleanest pearl snap shirt and his father's old belt buckle, a plain brass oval Dale Sr. had worn for 40 years. He stood in front of the case for a long time, looking at the helmet, the gold and red lines, the eyeball, the work of 8 minutes that had lasted 63 years. $15, Daddy, Roy said, quiet enough that only Dale Jr. heard him. Best $15 you ever spent. He paid for the AC compressor. He paid the property taxes 3 years forward. He sent Dale Jr. $20,000 and told him to use it however he wanted. He set up a small trust for his 3 grandchildren. He had the exhaust on the Tahoe fixed. Bonnie had complained about the noise and he had promised her he'd get to it. He bought Bonnie a new headstone with her full name and a line beneath that read, Wife, Mother. She let me ride. A letter came to Roy's post office box in February. It was from a 68-year-old man in Riverside, California, named Mike Jankowski. Mike's father, Stan, had been at the same car show in Maywood in the spring of 1961. Stan had watched Von Dutch paint a helmet for a big man in a leather vest who rode a panhead, a Bakersfield guy, Stan had said. An oil field guy paid Von Dutch $15, and Von Dutch said it was too much. Stan had taken a photograph, a single Kodachrome slide, of Von Dutch painting the helmet on the trunk of a car. Mike had found the slide in his father's estate in 2019 and had never known whose helmet was in the picture until he read the Peterson story online. He enclosed a scan of the slide. The photograph showed Von Dutch, skinny, bearded, wearing what appeared to be a pork pie hat, leaning over a white open-face helmet set on the trunk of a dark-colored car. His left hand held the helmet steady. His right hand held a thin brush at a shallow angle to the surface. The gold pinstripe was half finished, swept around the right side, not yet reaching the crown. A large man in a leather vest stood behind him with his arms folded, watching. Dale Culpeper, watching the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen a man do with a brush. Roy had the photograph framed. It hangs on the wall in the living room on Niles Street, beside the photograph of Dale on the panhead in 1960 and the photograph of Bonnie in the garden in 1995 and the small framed image of Roy in his marine dress blues in 1966. 4 frames, a family, a helmet, a brush, 8 minutes at a car show in 1961 that turned out to be worth more than any of them ever knew. And the next Saturday morning, back home in Bakersfield, Roy sat down at his usual booth at Dewar's Candy Shop on I Street with his 2 oldest friends, Harley Brock and Lupe Ornelas, the way he had every Saturday for 21 years. Harley looked at him over the rim of his coffee mug. Heard you made the Californian, Roy. Heard that. Motorcycle helmet, huh? Motorcycle helmet. Lupe shook his head. $15. $15, Roy agreed. The 3 of them laughed, the quiet, chest-deep laugh of old men who have lived long enough to know that the world rarely sees what matters and that sometimes, if you wait long enough, it finally does. A kid in a pawn shop looked at that helmet and said $15. He didn't know. They never do. If stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel, because some things have hidden worth.